There is something about Keanu Reeves that makes you stop and think about what it truly means to be human. In a world filled with noise and ego and endless self-promotion, he moves through life like a quiet river. He does not chase attention. He does not demand recognition. He simply exists with a kindness so pure that it reminds us all of who we could be if we just tried a little harder to be gentle with one another. I have spent a long time watching interviews, reading stories, and learning about this man who has faced unimaginable loss yet still chooses love over bitterness. He lost his best friend River Phoenix to a tragic overdose in 1993. He lost his daughter Ava, who was stillborn in 1999, and then lost the mother of that child Jennifer Syme in a car accident just 2 years later. The weight of that grief would crush most people. It would turn them cold and hard and closed off from the world. But Keanu chose a different path. He chose to keep his heart open even when it hurt. He chose to believe that kindness still matters even when life gives you every reason to become unkind. That is why he inspires me, not because he is a movie star, not because he has fame or money or success, but because he proves every single day that you can suffer deeply and still be soft. You can carry pain and still offer comfort to others. You can lose everything and still find reasons to give. And this story I am about to share with you is proof of exactly that. The morning felt different somehow, carrying a weight that Sandra Bullock could not quite name. Sunlight filtered through the curtains of her small apartment, casting soft golden patterns across the floor. She sat on the edge of her bed, her hands resting in her lap, her breath shallow and uncertain. There was a stillness inside her that felt heavier than silence, the kind of quiet that comes when you are standing at the edge of something life-changing. She did not know what this day would bring, but she could feel in her bones that nothing would ever be quite the same again. It was the summer of 1994, and Sandra was 30 years old. She had been working in Hollywood for nearly a decade, taking small roles and forgettable parts, trying to prove to the world that she belonged. But no matter how hard she worked, no matter how many auditions she nailed, there was always a voice in the back of her mind telling her she was not enough, not pretty enough, not talented enough, not special enough to make it in this brutal industry. Today she was heading to the set of a new action film called Speed. She had landed the female lead opposite an actor named Keanu Reeves. She had heard stories about him from people in the industry. They said he was different from other actors. They said he was kind and humble and treated everyone with respect regardless of their position. But Sandra had learned not to trust what people said. In Hollywood, reputation and reality were often completely different things. The drive to the set took 45 minutes. Sandra gripped the steering wheel tightly the entire way, her knuckles turning white from the pressure. Her heart was pounding. Her thoughts were racing with every possible scenario. The director could hate her performance. The crew could find her difficult to work with. Keanu Reeves could be cold and dismissive and make her feel even smaller than she already felt. When she finally arrived, the set was already buzzing with activity. Crew members rushed past her carrying heavy equipment. Someone was shouting instructions through a megaphone. The massive bus that would be featured in the film sat in the middle of the lot, gleaming under the bright California sun. Sandra stood frozen for a moment, taking it all in, feeling completely overwhelmed and out of place. And then she heard a voice behind her. "First day is always the strangest, right? You never quite know where you are supposed to stand." Sandra turned around, startled. Standing there with his hands in his pockets and a warm, genuine smile on his face was Keanu Reeves. He was taller than she expected. His eyes were dark and kind, filled with something that looked almost like understanding. He did not carry himself like a movie star. He carried himself like someone who was genuinely happy to meet her. "I am Keanu," he said, extending his hand. "I guess we are going to be stuck on a bus together for the next few months." "Sandra," she replied, shaking his hand. "And yes, the first day is definitely strange. I keep waiting for someone to realize they made a mistake and send me home." Keanu laughed softly. "I have been doing this for years and I still feel that way sometimes. You are not alone." There was no arrogance in his voice, no condescension. He was simply telling her the truth, one nervous human being to another, and that simple act of honesty made Sandra feel something she had not felt in a long time. She felt seen. Over the following weeks of filming, Sandra discovered that Keanu was exactly who people said he was, perhaps even more so. He was patient with every member of the crew. He remembered everyone's names from the director to the person who brought coffee. He never raised his voice or made demands. When scenes were difficult, he offered encouragement instead of criticism. But it was the small moments that truly revealed his character. Sandra later shared in interviews that during the filming of Speed, Keanu did something that stayed with her for decades. She had mentioned casually that she loved champagne and flowers but rarely received them. She thought nothing of the comment and forgot about it almost immediately. But Keanu did not forget. Days later, flowers and champagne arrived for her, not because of any special occasion, not because he wanted something in return, simply because he had listened when she spoke and wanted to make her smile. It was such a small gesture in some ways, but to Sandra it meant everything. It showed her that someone was paying attention. Someone cared about the little things. Someone thought she was worth the effort. Years later, Sandra would tell this story in interviews, her voice soft with emotion and gratitude. She would explain that Keanu's kindness was not a performance for cameras or publicity. It was simply who he was. And she would never forget it. But neither of them knew in that moment on the Speed set that their paths would cross again and again over the coming decades. They did not know that their friendship would become one of the most beautiful examples of genuine connection in Hollywood. They did not know that Sandra would one day call him her guardian angel. Speed premiered on June 10, 1994, and everything Sandra Bullock had dreamed about suddenly became real. The film was a massive success, earning over $350 million worldwide. Audiences fell in love with the chemistry between Sandra and Keanu. Critics praised her performance. Overnight, Sandra went from struggling actress to one of the most sought-after stars in Hollywood. But here is something that nobody knew at the time, something that would remain a secret for over 2 decades. Sandra had developed a crush on Keanu during filming. She found herself looking forward to their scenes together. She noticed the way he laughed, the way he listened, the way he made everyone around him feel comfortable and valued. There was something magnetic about his quiet confidence and genuine kindness. But Sandra never said a word about her feelings. She convinced herself it was just admiration for a colleague. She told herself it would be unprofessional to complicate their working relationship. What Sandra did not know was that Keanu felt exactly the same way about her. Years later, in a 2018 interview, Keanu finally admitted the truth. When asked about working with Sandra on Speed, his face softened, and he confessed that he had a crush on her during filming. He said she was so wonderful and that they became friends, and he always loved watching her work. But just like Sandra, Keanu never said anything at the time. He kept his feelings to himself, choosing to admire her from a respectful distance rather than risk making her uncomfortable. 2 people, the same secret, neither one brave enough to speak. When Sandra eventually learned about Keanu's confession in that interview, she was genuinely shocked. She responded publicly, saying she had no idea he felt that way. She admitted that she too had a crush on him but thought it was one-sided. She said they were both so professional that they never crossed that line. It was a beautiful revelation. 2 people who had cared for each other deeply, who had worked side by side for months, who had shared something special without ever naming it. The timing had never been right. Life had pulled them in different directions, but the respect and affection between them had never faded. This is what makes their friendship so remarkable. It was never about romance or possession. It was about genuine appreciation for who the other person truly was. The years after Speed brought tremendous success for both of them. Sandra starred in While You Were Sleeping and A Time to Kill and Miss Congeniality. She became one of the highest-paid actresses in the world. Keanu continued his own journey, eventually finding massive success with the Matrix trilogy that would define a generation. They did not see each other often during those years. Their schedules rarely aligned. But when their paths did cross at industry events or award shows, the warmth between them was always evident. There were no awkward tensions or unresolved feelings. There was simply a deep mutual respect that time could not diminish. In 2005, something wonderful happened. They were offered a chance to work together again. The film was called The Lake House. It was a romantic drama about 2 people living in the same house but in different time periods, communicating only through letters left in a mailbox. It was a quieter film than Speed, more emotional, more intimate. And for Sandra and Keanu, it was a chance to reconnect after more than a decade apart. Sandra later described the experience of reuniting with Keanu as something truly special. She said it felt natural, like no time had passed at all. They slipped back into their easy friendship as if they had never been apart. The trust they had built on the speed set was still there, perhaps even stronger than before. Keanu spoke about the reunion with equal fondness. He said that Sandra was still the same wonderful person he remembered. He praised her talent, her work ethic, her ability to make everyone on set feel valued. He said working with her again reminded him why he loved his job. The Lake House was not a blockbuster like Speed. It received mixed reviews and modest box office returns. But for Sandra and Keanu, the film represented something more valuable than commercial success. It proved that their connection was real and lasting. It showed the world that some friendships can survive distance and time and the pressures of fame. But life was about to test Sandra in ways she never expected. In 2005, the same year the Lake House began production, Sandra married Jesse James. He was a television personality and businessman. He seemed charming and devoted. Sandra believed she had finally found her partner, the person she would spend the rest of her life with. In 2010, Sandra reached the peak of her career. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress for her role in The Blind Side. She stood on that stage, holding the golden statue, and thanked her husband in her speech. She talked about love and support and gratitude. It was supposed to be the happiest moment of her life. The same month she won the Oscar, Sandra finalized the adoption of her son Louis. She held that tiny baby in her arms and felt a love unlike anything she had experienced before. She was an Academy Award winner. She was a new mother. Everything seemed perfect. And then, just days later, everything fell apart. The scandal broke in March 2010. Multiple women came forward claiming they had affairs with Jesse James during his marriage to Sandra. The details were everywhere. Tabloids printed photos and text messages. The story dominated headlines for weeks. Sandra was devastated. She had just experienced the highest high of her career, and now she was experiencing the lowest low of her personal life. The contrast was cruel and public and inescapable. Everywhere she looked, she saw her own humiliation reflected back at her. She retreated from public view. She stopped answering calls. She focused all her energy on her newborn son, the one pure and innocent thing in her life that the scandal could not touch. The world watched and waited to see what Sandra Bullock would do next. Would she crumble under the pressure? Would she lash out in anger? Would she disappear forever? But Sandra had something the world did not fully understand. She had years of quiet lessons from a man who knew about suffering, who knew about loss, who knew about choosing kindness even when life gave you every reason to be bitter. She had the example of Keanu Reeves. And though they were not in constant contact during those dark days, the seeds he had planted in her heart during their time together were about to bloom in ways neither of them could have predicted. The scandal consumed everything. For months, Sandra Bullock lived in a state of shock and grief that felt like drowning. She would wake up each morning, and for a few precious seconds she would forget. Then the memory would crash back over her like a wave, and she would have to learn how to breathe all over again. She stayed in her house, curtains drawn, world shut out. She could not bear the pitying looks from strangers. She could not handle the questions from well-meaning friends who did not know what to say. She just wanted to disappear. But she had a baby son who needed her. Louis was only a few weeks old, completely dependent on her for everything. He did not care about scandals or headlines or broken marriages. He just needed his mother. So Sandra forced herself to get out of bed. She forced herself to feed and bathe and hold her son. She found a new rhythm in the quiet moments of motherhood. In the dark of night, when Louis would wake up crying, the world outside fell away, and there was only the two of them. Sandra discovered that love was stronger than shame, that being a mother was more important than being a wife. She made a decision during those months. She would not let the scandal define her. She would not let Jesse James' betrayal destroy the life she was building for her son. She would rise from the ashes, not as the woman the world thought they knew, but as the woman she truly was. But rising is hard work, and sometimes even the strongest people need help. One afternoon, as Sandra sat in her quiet house holding sleeping Louis, her phone rang. She almost did not answer. She had stopped taking calls from most people, but something made her pick it up. Hello. Hi, Sandra, it is Keanu. She felt her breath catch in her throat. She had not heard his voice in a while. They had not been in regular contact, just occasional texts and emails over the years. I heard what happened, Keanu said. I wanted to call sooner. I did not want to intrude, but I kept thinking about you. Sandra did not know what to say. She felt tears welling up. Hearing his voice, so kind and familiar, made something inside her crack open. "I am okay," she managed to say, though her voice betrayed her. "You do not have to be okay," Keanu replied gently. "You are allowed to not be okay." They talked for a long time that afternoon. Keanu did not offer advice or platitudes. He did not tell her everything happens for a reason or that she would find someone better. He just listened. He let her talk about the anger and the humiliation and the fear. He let her be messy and human and broken. And then he said something that Sandra would never forget. "You know what I have learned," he said. "The world will try to tell you that your story is this scandal, that you are the woman whose husband cheated, that this moment defines you. But it does not. Your story is Louis. Your story is every person you have touched with your kindness. Your story is the woman who showed up on that movie set in 1994, terrified but brave. You get to write what comes next." Sandra cried then, really cried, not just tears but deep sobs that came from a place of relief. Because for the first time since the scandal broke, someone had reminded her that she was more than the worst thing that had happened to her. After that phone call, something shifted. Sandra started to emerge from the darkness. She began working again, choosing roles that felt meaningful. She threw herself into being a mother. She rebuilt her life piece by piece, not forgetting what had happened but refusing to let it be the end of her story. The years that followed were about healing and growth. Sandra made films that reminded her of her own strength. She built a home for Louis filled with love and laughter. She learned to trust herself again. But life has a way of testing us in ways we never expect. In 2018, Sandra was sitting in her home on a quiet evening when her phone rang at 2:47 in the morning. She knew immediately that this was not a social call. No one calls at that hour with good news. She answered, her heart pounding. "Sandra," the voice said. It was Keanu, but his voice sounded wrong, strained, not the calm, steady tone she knew. "What is wrong?" she asked, already standing, already reaching for her keys. "I need you to come," he said. "I am scared." Without another word, Sandra was out the door. When she arrived at Keanu's house, she found him sitting in his living room, looking smaller than she had ever seen him. He was usually so steady, so solid. But tonight he looked fragile, vulnerable, like a man staring into the abyss. "What happened?" Sandra asked, kneeling in front of him. Keanu took a shaky breath before speaking. "I have been having headaches for weeks," he said, "bad ones. I finally went to the doctor yesterday. They did scans. There is something in my brain, Sandra. They do not know what it is yet. They are talking about more tests, maybe surgery. I do not know what to do." Sandra felt the room tilt. This was the man who had been her rock, her guardian angel, the man who had shown up for her when she was at her lowest, and now he needed her. "Tell me what you need," she said, her voice fierce and steady. "I am here. I am not going anywhere." Keanu looked at her with tears in his eyes. "I do not know how to do this," he whispered. "I have lost so much in my life. I do not think I can lose anything else." "You are not losing anything," Sandra said, taking his hand. "We are going to figure this out together. You showed me how to survive when everything fell apart. Now I am going to show you." She stayed with him all night. They talked and cried and made plans. Sandra called her own doctors and got second opinions. She researched specialists and treatment options. She became his advocate, his protector, his guardian angel in return. The next few weeks were a blur of appointments and tests and waiting for results. Through it all, Sandra was by Keanu's side. She held his hand in waiting rooms. She drove him to appointments. She sat with him in silence when words were not enough. Their friendship deepened in those weeks. They had been through so much together over the years, but this was different. This was life and death. This was the ultimate test of what it means to truly show up for someone. And they both passed the test. Eventually, the doctors determined that the mass in Keanu's brain was not cancerous. It was a benign tumor that could be treated with medication and careful monitoring. It was not a death sentence, but it was a wake-up call, a reminder of how fragile life is. Through the fear and uncertainty, Sandra and Keanu found something beautiful. They found that their bond had become unbreakable. They had become family in every sense of the word. And when the crisis passed, they made a promise to each other. No matter what life brought, they would always be there. They would always show up. They would always choose each other. Something changed between Sandra and Keanu after that night. The walls that people naturally build around themselves, even with close friends, had come down completely. They had seen each other at their most vulnerable. They had held each other through fear and uncertainty, and they had discovered that their friendship was stronger than either of them had realized. In the months that followed, they made a conscious effort to stay connected, not in the performative way that Hollywood friendships often work, with publicists arranging photo opportunities and strategic appearances together, but in the quiet, real way that true friends stay in each other's lives. Phone calls on difficult days, text messages checking in, the simple knowledge that someone out there understood you completely. Sandra threw herself back into her work with renewed energy. In 2013, she starred in Gravity, a film that would become one of the defining performances of her career. She played an astronaut stranded alone in space, fighting to survive against impossible odds. The role required her to carry almost the entire film by herself, suspended in harnesses for months, performing against nothing but green screens and her own imagination. It was grueling and exhausting, and sometimes she wondered if she could make it through. But every time she felt herself faltering, she thought about the lessons she had learned, about resilience, about refusing to give up, about the people who believed in her even when she struggled to believe in herself. Gravity premiered at the Venice Film Festival in August 2013. The reviews were extraordinary. Critics called it a masterpiece and praised Sandra's performance as the best of her career. She was nominated for her second Academy Award. The film earned over $700 million worldwide. But what mattered most to Sandra was not the awards or the money. It was the message of the film itself. A woman alone in the darkness, fighting to find her way back to Earth, fighting to survive, fighting to live. She knew something about that kind of fight. Meanwhile, Keanu was experiencing his own remarkable resurgence. In 2014, he starred in a film called John Wick. It was an action thriller about a retired hitman seeking revenge after criminals killed his dog, the last gift from his deceased wife. The film was a surprise hit, launching a franchise that would span multiple sequels and earn billions of dollars. But what made John Wick special was not just the action. It was the emotional core of the story. A man who had lost everything, who had retreated from the world, who was pulled back into violence by grief and love. Keanu brought a depth to the character that elevated the material beyond typical action fare. Audiences responded not just to the film, but to Keanu himself. Stories about his kindness began circulating on the internet. Photos of him giving up his subway seat to strangers. Reports of him taking pay cuts so that crew members could receive better wages. Tales of him spending time with fans who approached him on the street, never rushing, always present. Keanu became more than a movie star. He became a symbol of what it meant to be a genuinely good person in a world that often rewarded selfishness and ego. Sandra watched her friend's renaissance with pride and joy. She knew better than anyone how much Keanu had been through. She knew about the losses he carried, the grief that never fully healed. And she knew that his kindness was not a performance. It was simply who he was. In interviews, Sandra began speaking more openly about their friendship. She talked about the flowers and champagne he had sent her during Speed. She talked about his humility and generosity. She talked about how rare it was to find someone in Hollywood who remained unchanged by fame. But it was in 2018 that something remarkable happened. Something that would finally reveal the depth of what had always existed between them. Keanu was doing press for one of his films when an interviewer asked him about working with Sandra on Speed all those years ago. The question was casual, the kind of standard inquiry that actors answer thousands of times throughout their careers. But Keanu's response was anything but standard. His face softened, his eyes grew warm, and he admitted something he had kept secret for over 2 decades. She was so wonderful, he said. We became friends, and I always loved watching her work. He paused, then added with a shy smile, I had a crush on her. The interviewer was surprised. The internet exploded. Headlines appeared everywhere. Keanu Reeves admits he had a crush on Sandra Bullock during Speed. When Sandra saw the interview, she was stunned. She had no idea. All those months of working together, all those years of friendship, and she had never known that Keanu felt that way about her. And then she made her own confession. In a subsequent interview, Sandra admitted that she too had harbored feelings for Keanu during filming. She said she had thought her crush was one-sided. She had never imagined that he felt the same way. I think about how sweet Keanu Reeves was, Sandra said, and how handsome he was. It was hard. It was really hard for me to be serious. The revelation captured the public's imagination. Here were two beloved stars admitting that they had secretly cared for each other for over 20 years. It was like a real-life romantic comedy, except neither of them had ever made a move. When asked why nothing ever happened between them, Sandra gave an honest answer. "We were working," she explained. "I think there was something about keeping it professional that made sense. But honestly, I do not think I knew he had a crush on me. He never told me." The timing had never been right. When one was available, the other was not. Life had pulled them in different directions. Romance had never blossomed. But something more valuable had grown instead. They had built a friendship that transcended attraction, a bond that survived distance and time and the pressures of fame, a connection based on mutual respect and genuine admiration for who the other person truly was. In some ways, this was more beautiful than any romance could have been, because romances can fade, passion can diminish, but the kind of friendship Sandra and Keanu shared, the kind built on decades of kindness and support, that was something that would last forever. And Sandra was about to show the world just how much Keanu meant to her. The mutual crush revelation changed something in the public perception of Sandra and Keanu. Suddenly, the world saw their friendship through new eyes. Every interview they gave, every time they mentioned each other, people searched for hidden meanings and secret glances. The internet was filled with compilations of their moments together, fans analyzing every smile and every touch. But Sandra and Keanu remained exactly who they had always been. They did not perform for cameras or manufacture moments for publicity. They simply continued being friends in the quiet, genuine way they always had. In the years that followed, both of them faced questions about their relationship in almost every interview. Journalists wanted to know if they were secretly dating. Fans wanted to know if they would ever give romance a chance. The curiosity was endless. Sandra addressed the speculation with her typical honesty and humor. "Keanu is such a wonderful person," she said in one interview. "He is one of the kindest people I have ever known, but what we have is something different, something that does not need a label." Keanu responded similarly when asked about Sandra. "She is amazing," he said simply. "She has been through so much and come out stronger every time. I admire her more than I can say." What struck people about their answers was the complete absence of awkwardness or tension. There was no bitterness about missed opportunities, no regret about paths not taken. There was only gratitude for what they had found in each other. And what they had found was rare. In Hollywood, friendships are often transactional. People connect based on what they can do for each other's careers. Relationships rise and fall with box office returns. Loyalty is a luxury few can afford in an industry built on competition and insecurity. But Sandra and Keanu had built something different. Their friendship was rooted in moments of genuine vulnerability. The nervous actress on her first day of a big film set. The quiet actor who sent flowers just because he had been listening. The phone call in the middle of the night when the world was falling apart. The hand held in waiting rooms during frightening times. These were not the building blocks of a Hollywood friendship. These were the building blocks of family. As the years passed, Sandra became more comfortable speaking about what Keanu meant to her. She stopped deflecting with humor and started sharing the truth. In one particularly moving interview, Sandra was asked to describe Keanu in a few words. She paused for a long moment, her eyes growing distant as if she was looking back through decades of memories. "He is my guardian angel," she said finally. Her voice was soft but certain. "He has always been there. Not in a loud way, not in a way that demands attention or credit, but in the way that matters. When I have needed someone, he has shown up. Every single time." The interviewer asked her to elaborate. Sandra took a breath before continuing. "You know, this industry can be so harsh. People build you up just to tear you down. They pretend to be your friend when they want something, then disappear when you need them. Keanu has never been that way. He is exactly who he appears to be. Kind, genuine, present. And that is so rare that sometimes I still cannot believe he is real." She laughed softly, but there were tears in her eyes. "I have been through some difficult times in my life," Sandra continued. "Moments when I did not know how to keep going, and Keanu was always there with exactly what I needed. Sometimes it was advice. Sometimes it was just listening. Sometimes it was showing up at my door with food and refusing to leave until I ate something." She paused again. That is what a guardian angel does, she said. They do not fix everything. They do not make the pain go away. They just remind you that you are not alone, and Keanu has done that for me more times than I can count. The interview went viral. Millions of people watched Sandra speak about her friend with such love and admiration. Comments flooded in from viewers who were moved by the purity of their bond. But it was Keanu's response that truly captured hearts. When asked about Sandra calling him her guardian angel, Keanu grew quiet. His face showed the familiar mix of humility and discomfort he always displayed when receiving praise. I do not know about guardian angel, he said slowly. I am just her friend. I try to be there when I can. She has done the same for me. The interviewer pressed further, asking Keanu to share what Sandra meant to him. Keanu thought for a long moment before answering. Sandra is one of the most genuine people I have ever known, he said. She has a way of making everyone around her feel seen and valued. She has been through things that would break most people, and she has come out the other side with her heart still open. That takes incredible strength, incredible courage. He paused, his eyes growing distant. When I think about the people who have mattered in my life, he continued, Sandra is at the top of that list. Not because of anything flashy or dramatic, but because of the small moments. The phone calls, the understanding, the way she shows up and keeps showing up year after year. He smiled softly. If she calls me her guardian angel, then I guess she is mine too. The mutual acknowledgement of their importance to each other was beautiful to witness. Two people who had known each other for over 25 years, who had watched each other struggle and triumph, who had built a friendship on the simple foundation of showing up. But Sandra was not finished sharing her heart with the world. There was one more thing she needed to say, one more truth she needed to reveal. And it would explain everything. It was a quiet evening in Los Angeles when Sandra Bullock sat down for what would become one of the most talked-about interviews of her career. The setting was simple. 2 chairs, soft lighting, no audience, just Sandra and a journalist who had been given permission to ask the question everyone wanted answered. Why do you call Keanu Reeves your guardian angel? Sandra smiled when she heard the question. It was the same question she had been asked dozens of times before, but tonight she was ready to give the full answer, the complete truth. She leaned back in her chair and began to speak. You know, people hear the words guardian angel and they think of something supernatural, something magical, wings and halos and divine intervention. But that is not what I mean when I use those words for Keanu. She paused, gathering her thoughts. What I mean is something much simpler and much more profound. I mean a person who sees you, really sees you. Not the version of you that appears in magazines or on movie screens, but the real you, the scared you, the broken you, the you that wakes up at 3 in the morning wondering if you are enough. Sandra's voice grew softer. Keanu saw me on the very first day we met. I was terrified. I was convinced I did not belong on that set. I was waiting for someone to tap me on the shoulder and tell me there had been a mistake. And Keanu walked up to me and made me feel like I had every right to be there, like I belonged. She shook her head slowly. You have to understand how rare that is, especially in this industry. People are always sizing you up, always calculating what you can do for them, always looking past you to see who else is in the room. But Keanu has never been that way, not once in all the years I have known him. The interviewer asked Sandra to share specific moments that illustrated their friendship. Sandra thought for a moment before responding. There are so many, she said, but let me tell you about the flowers and champagne. We were filming Speed and I mentioned casually that I loved champagne and flowers, just an offhand comment, nothing significant. And a few days later they showed up at my door. No occasion, no reason, just because Keanu had been listening. She smiled at the memory. That might seem like a small thing, flowers and champagne, but it was not small to me. It told me that this person actually heard me, actually cared enough to remember something I had said and act on it. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how many people in this world are just waiting for their turn to talk instead of actually listening? Sandra continued. And then there were the harder moments, the moments that do not make for fun stories at parties. When my marriage fell apart, when my whole world was crumbling around me, Keanu was there. Not with cameras or publicity, just there, checking in, reminding me that I was more than the worst thing that had happened to me. She wiped her eyes. He told me once that the world would try to define me by my lowest moment, that tabloids would tell me my story was scandal and betrayal. But he said that was not my story. My story was my son, my work, the people I had touched with kindness. He said I got to write what comes next. Sandra looked directly into the camera. That is what a guardian angel does. They do not wave a magic wand and make everything better. They remind you who you are when you have forgotten. They hold up a mirror and show you your own strength when all you can see is weakness. The interviewer asked one final question. After all these years, what did Sandra most want people to understand about Keanu Reeves? Sandra did not hesitate. I want people to understand that he is real, she said. What you see is what you get. The kindness is not an act. The humility is not a performance. He has been through things that would destroy most people. He has lost more than anyone should have to lose. And he still chooses to be gentle. He still chooses to be kind. He still chooses to show up for people. She took a breath. In a world that often rewards selfishness and cruelty, Keanu Reeves is proof that goodness still exists. That you can be successful without being ruthless. That you can be famous without losing yourself. That you can carry pain and still offer comfort to others. Sandra's final words were simple but powerful. He is my guardian angel because he taught me how to be one too. He showed me that the most important thing we can do for each other is just stay. Just show up. Just refuse to let the people we love face their darkest moments alone. The interview ended, but the impact of Sandra's words continued to ripple outward. Millions of people watched the clip. It was shared across social media platforms. Comments poured in from viewers who were moved by the depth of their friendship. People wrote about their own guardian angels, their own keenness, the quiet people in their lives who had shown up when it mattered most. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of this story. You do not need fame or money to be a guardian angel. You do not need special powers or divine intervention. You just need to pay attention, to listen when people speak, to remember the small things, to show up when times are hard, to remind the people you love that they are worthy of love. Keanu Reeves has spent his life doing exactly that. Not for recognition, not for praise, simply because that is who he is. And Sandra Bullock recognized it, honored it, shared it with the world. Their friendship is not a fairy tale. It is something better. It is a testament to what happens when two people choose kindness over convenience, when they choose presence over performance, when they choose to stay even when staying is hard. We live in a world that often feels cold and disconnected, a world where people scroll past each other without really seeing, where loneliness is epidemic even in crowded rooms, where kindness is sometimes treated as weakness. But Sandra and Keanu remind us of another way, a better way. They remind us that the bonds we build through showing up again and again are the bonds that last. That friendship is not about grand gestures, but about consistent presence. That the people who matter most are the ones who see us at our worst and stay anyway. So the next time you have the chance to listen instead of talk, take it. The next time someone you love is struggling, show up. The next time the world feels dark and cold, be the warmth someone needs. Be a guardian angel. Not with wings or halos, but with presence and patience and the simple refusal to let the people you love feel alone. That is the beautiful reason Sandra Bullock calls Keanu Reeves her guardian angel. And that is the beautiful reason this story matters.